Hello, I'm Diana Reich, the Artistic Director of the Charleston Literary Festival based in South Carolina, USA. I would like to welcome you from wherever in the world that you may be watching. If the past fraught 18 months has taught us anything, it has taught us that books and their authors, whether classical or contemporary, really matter. In trying times, readers turn to books for insights into the human condition, for the opportunity to be transported to other worlds, for ideas, for arguments, for inspiration, for experiencing the impossible, for laughter, and for the release of tears. The festival will provide the opportunity to engage with a galaxy of literary and artistic stars, as well as up-and-coming writers who are making waves. We have a far-flung cast list featuring authors from all over the United States, as well as the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Whether they're talking about former literary trailblazers, or gene editing, or human rights, or popular culture, or feminism, or medieval nuns, or innumerable other subjects, they have one thing in common: the ability of compelling stories to linger in our imaginations. We're grateful to all our speakers, whether virtual or in person, for sharing their talents. Please thank them by purchasing their books. The festival couldn't happen without a committed team and board. We would like to thank our donors, both private and public, who generously make the festival possible. The College of Charleston, our academic partner, has been an invaluable source of support. It's no accident that the festival takes place in Charleston, a prime destination with a progressive literary and artistic tradition. Please come and see for yourselves, but make sure to visit during the Charleston Literary Festival, which takes place during the first half of November each year. Meanwhile, I hope that you enjoy the 2021 Charleston Literary Festival and that it makes you think and dream afresh. I'm delighted to welcome novelists Nathan Harris, Patricia Lockwood, and Maggie Shipstead, as well as moderator Bill Goldstein, to this Booker Prize celebration event. The Booker Prize is a literary award founded in 1969, so a venerable 52 years old, given each year to the best novel written in English and published in the UK and Ireland. It's the leading literary award for a novel written in English. American authors have been allowed to enter since 2014. Paul Beatty received the prize for The Sellout in 2016. George Saunders, who participated virtually in this year's festival, received the prize for Lincoln in the Bardo in 2017. And the Scottish author Douglas Stewart, who's lived in New York for many years and has dual British and American citizenship, won for Shuggybane in 2020. Bill Goldstein, the moderator of this session, is editor of the New York Times Books website and book critic for the weekend edition of WNBC's Today New York. He's also the author of the non-fiction book, The World Broke in Two. I'll hand over to Bill to introduce three of this year's Booker-nominated authors.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Diana. Can everyone hear me? I've unmuted myself. Everybody, Nathan, Maggie, Patricia seem to have unmuted themselves. So Nathan Harris in my lower right-hand corner. I don't know where he is on your screen. Patricia Lockwood on my lower left, and Maggie Shipstead. Maggie is the author of Great Circle. Patricia Lockwood is the author of No One Is Talking About This. And Nathan Harris is, the author of The Sweetness of Water. So those are the three Booker Prize nominees. And I thought I would start by asking, since all three of you were nominated but did not win, is it truly an honor just to be nominated? No, I mean, it's not. I was quite nervous that of the people who are going to be on the panel, perhaps one would be a winner and then the others would have only been nominated, and it might be awkward. But we are all you are all alike in that way. So you are prize nominees rather than having to contend with the evil winner here in our conversation. Nominated. So tell us, about the Booker run-up and sort of what it was like first to be nominated and the attention even that brings. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling how much attention the Booker long list and then the Booker short list get. So why don't you tell me, each of you, like, sort of what your experience was in finding out that you were nominated? Nathan, I guess let's do this alphabetically at first. And then we'll things up. Nathan Harris goes first alphabetically.
It was surreal. I'm still not quite sure why I was nominated. It seems kind of bizarre to me. But it was a great honor and kind of a whirlwind. I'm deeply jealous of the other two because they got to go to England for the short list, and I was, stuck back here. No, it's any recognition whatsoever is amazing. So, especially for a debut. So I'm happy as can be.
For your first novel, it's also, you were picked by Oprah Winfrey, which was sort of more astounding to you in a way, Booker or Oprah Winfrey?
Oh, don't make me pick between my parents of recognitions that I've gotten. I don't know, they're different. Oprah is, on some level, she's the biggest name around, but on the other, she's just a really committed reader. She called me up when we were just talking about her favorite lines of the novel and her favorite characters, and it was like talking to anybody who loves the book in a way. So I don't know. It's amazing to have that recognition from her as a fan, but the Booker committee as well is amazing too. So I can't give you a straight answer, but it's all great to me.
Patricia, so
yes.
Your book was published in February here in the United States. I don't know if it was published at the same time in England.
Yeah, it came out around the same time. Maggie will probably feel differently about this, but I was quite relieved that I didn't win. We'll save it for her answer, but I was extremely relieved. For one, because we got this schedule, this extremely intense, granular schedule that showed us what the winner would have to do the next 2 days. And our bodies, our young, supple, beautiful bodies had already been destroyed just by the travel, by the COVID testing, by the actual ceremony at the BBC Theater, which was, quite intense. Only like 20 people could be there or something. We came in, we rehearsed it for like 1,000 hours while we were wearing masks. And then I think I got the giggles during the ceremony when Samira, the host, talked about the attractive prize. I started to have like hysterics because it's just, you were deprived of food for a long time, and then you were given an enormous plate of like coq au vin was what I had before, like to ensure that the winner would upchuck when they went up to the podium. So I was relieved about it. I really enjoyed being a shortlistee though. That, I don't know, that's like the money to me. It was, as Nathan said, extremely surreal. I had no idea why it happened. I almost felt like the Booker was like, maybe like our internet writer, like maybe it was to be like, we're with the times, we're cyber as well. The Booker is a very cyber prize. So I didn't know why I was shortlisted either. Maggie probably knows, she knows.
Well, Maggie, why do you think you were shortlisted, or why do you think Nathan and Patricia were shortlisted?
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I was not shortlisted, to be clear, you guys. We don't need to bring this up in different.
Nathan.
I'm joking. No, long listed only. But yeah, carry on. Don't get in the way.
I don't. These things are so human. I feel like before I published a book, or even earlier on, it kind of seemed like literary prizes just like came down from God. But of course, it's just kind of a random selection of people who agree to do this genuinely oppressive task every year where they read, 150 books. And so it just comes down to like their taste and what they agree on and what people they don't agree on. So there's definitely randomness to it. And you have to be grateful for being sort of the beneficiary of that. But yeah, it was a harrowing experience in some ways. And it's very much something that happens to you.
Yeah.
Like you're really out of control. Anouk, one of the other shortlistees, had a lot to say about that. We got on the bus after the ceremony when Damon was being taken away to like the publicity gulag. And Anouk was like, a moment of silence for Damon.
Yeah. It's true.
Brutal.
We were physically put onto a loser's bus after we lost. It should have been on the side or something that was like the losers. And they just took us away forever. We never saw Damon again, basically.
Or each other, really.
No, I was like, well, I really loved those people. We were together every minute for 5 days or something. And then we just it's bye. No, we don't even have each other's email addresses. It's like, okay, it's time.
No, Richard Powers kept putting his face between the seats because he was sitting behind me and my boyfriend. And he was like, the hardest part is consoling all the people who are consoling you.
That's true. That's true.
Well, it's very, when you were saying something about, the horrible task that people undertake, you were talking about the judges. I thought you were talking about the shared experience of being novelists, and that each of you has taken upon themselves, the unenviable, or whatever the word, the horrific task of writing novels, that you've shared in that. So,
well, why did we do that? I might be the only one on the list who was like, I might never write another novel again. I mean, that was my chance. That was like Bill Murray at the Lost in Translation Oscars. That was his one shot to get this done. Like, for me, I'm like, I might never write another lie again ever in my life.
So you don't think that a novel has a kind of higher truth? I mean, I like the way you said, I wrote, I will never write, you might not write another lie.
Yeah, well, we're just digging right into it now. No, I do. And I'm actually working on another novel then. So I was just lying to you before. But I definitely believe in that higher truth thing, though. I really, really do. I do agree with you there.
I'm very worried about this conversation because in reading your book, Patricia, this line jumped out at me. The narrator is having a conversation, not the narrator, the perspective of this mind at work. She thought the first necessity for this conversation is that I do not ask, why would you do that? So I started to think, okay, well, what can I ask? I mean, that is precluding me from even having any good questions. I'm afraid to ask Patricia Lockwood.
No, you should go with your absolute dumbest question. The dumbest thing that occurred to you as you were reading my book. I challenge you to ask me that.
Oh, well, let me think about that. There's so many silly questions that I'll have to choose. Let you on that. One of the challenges of doing, and fun things about doing a panel like this is, of course, you don't really have very much in common. Your books are not all about the same thing. We haven't chosen you as novelists because you are all addressing the same kind of thing or even written the same kind of novel. So I was trying to think of connections. So were you a fan of Maggie's book? Had you read it? I mean, have you read it?
Well, that's the funny part. So the other great thing about being there in London with all of these authors, these wonderful writers, is that I hadn't read anyone's book. I hadn't read anybody's book on the long list. And I'm so glad to know that, because then I couldn't feel like, you don't deserve to win, man. I read your piece of crap. Like, I hadn't read anybody's book because I got really ill last year and it affected my ability to read as quickly as I normally do. So it was almost a more pure experience. And then it was just about whether you got along with people and personalities, and the tremendous story of Damon Galgut, just running toward the finish line and just never quite getting there. And it being if he didn't win, it was this special hell that the booker had set up for him where he would just never win this prize. So no, I mean, I had previously been familiar with Maggie's work. It did not cross my mind that she was writing some 800-page long compendium about an aviatrix, and that's what I could have been doing instead. But it did rise to mind when we were both shortlisted. I was like, oh, there's Maggie. There's Maggie in my book.
So Maggie, we haven't talked about Great Circle yet. And Nathan, I'll come back to you to talk about Sweetness of Water. But I've said that it's partly the life story of an aviatrix, a great woman aviator in the first half of the 20th century. So why don't you tell me a little bit about who Marion Graves is and how her story either first came to you and then also how it comes to the attention of Hadley Baxter, who is another character in your novel.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, Marion Graves is a pilot. She's fictional. there's a lot of people looking her up on Wikipedia. She disappears in 1950 while trying to fly around the world north-south, so over the poles. And then the other sort of plot line in the book is a modern movie star named Hadley Baxter, who's playing her in a biopic and has kind of like imploded. She was in sort of a Twilight type series and has been publicly disgraced and been fired. And so she's offered the chance to play Marion and is trying to redeem herself and gets sort of sucked into the mystery of who Marion was and what happened to her. The idea for Marion came to me. The story I always tell is I saw this statue of a pilot named Gene Batten at the airport in Auckland in 2013. And it was right when another project had died on me. And I thought, oh, I should write a book about a female pilot. Gene Batten was the first person to fly from England to New Zealand in 1934. And the character is really a mishmash of a lot of real life pilots, many of whom were very famous at the time, but the only one we remember is Amelia Earhart. And Amelia Earhart was an ingredient in the book, but mostly through this question of what's the difference between disappearance and death, and why do we think of those things differently?
So I'm curious, Nathan, I mean, you at least have in common with Maggie that you wrote a historical novel. And I'm curious if you could say a little bit about, The Sweetness of Water begins with an unlikely encounter. And so it's a kind of beautiful historical what if these unlikely people met and there's a moment of kindness rather than fear among them. So if you could explain like who are George and then who are the brothers that he encounters and how does the novel get going?
Sure. Yeah. George is originally a Northerner. He's married to his wife, Isabel, and he's grieving the loss of his son in the Civil War. And he comes upon two brothers, Prentice and Landry, who have recently been freed on a plantation that is neighboring his land. And they're just sort of biding their time, deciding what to do next with their lives. And George, in sort of this moment of, grieving, he decides to kind of take them in, and they start working together. They want to save up to go north, and he's paying them a fair wage. And his naivete and his ignorance in making that decision to be close with them alongside his wife will have grave repercussions for the town of Old Ox. But you'd have to read it to find out more.
Yeah, fictional town.
It goes off in so many directions.
Patricia is in Georgia right now, and your novel is set in Georgia in a fictional town. I don't know how far it is from Savannah, which is where Patricia is, but it's obviously long distant in time, if not in geography. So,
yeah. I mean, I just wanted to say that Maggie, I read The Great Circle, and all of our books are so different, but I very much admired your work in the humanity of the characters, and I don't know, I think it represented everything that good historical fiction has. So I had read it before the Booker Prize list came out. So I don't know. It's
thank you.
I do think there are a lot of connections to be made, and just sort of the empathy of character, and I don't know, exploring the past, excavating the past, and finding these new kernels to bring to readers of parts of history that are kind of unexplored. So, Patricia, you're a totally different book, so I can't say the same for you, but it's in its own way,
It's true. I mean, and one thing about writing the sort of book that I had written was that you really did feel like an imposter on the list. And when you think about a book winning, you do think about this big honkin' slice of historical fiction. Like traditionally, the Booker winners that I had read, that's the sort of book I thought about when I thought about Booker winners. So I felt definitely like I was like sneaking around on there, and I didn't belong because of what I had done in the shameful book that I wrote.
we all felt that way.
I think we should give maybe I'll say something, or I don't know if Nathan or Maggie wants to describe Patricia's novel, but you make it seem much less of an achievement somehow. I mean, Patricia, than it is. I mean, it's a kind of historical novel about the present or the immediate past. I mean, and how quickly things change in the portal, which is the internet, the online life, and then how quickly reality intrudes. It's more episodic in its presentation on the page, and yet it's as seamless a narrative in its way as Great Circle and The Sweetness of Water are.
Thank you. That is very kind to say. I did think of it that way. I did think of it as a historical document, and maybe it's true that there is a sort of like a historical novel of the now. And the impulse with it was to put in everything, of course, every single thing that happened in every single moment of one of those days, and to sort of preserve a texture that was exactly that of the timeline. Which does feel like it's like running between your fingertips. It feels like it's running like silk through your head. You can feel it. And what I wanted was intactness, and that would involve putting in everything. So it was very difficult. And in the end, it felt a little bit fraudulent to cut anything out when what you wanted was this long swath, this unbroken thing, this scroll.
Well, how did that work in terms of what, I mean, as I said, it's a seamless whole in its way, and yet it hadn't occurred to me until you were just saying that I don't want to say the things are random because they build up to something, but are there a lot of paragraphs, interlude, I don't really know what to call them, are these snapshots is the wrong word because it's all text, obviously, but the paragraphs, are there many more that are lying on your cutting room floor? I mean,
oh yes. Oh, I have a document that would make God cry. It was so long, and everything was in there, and I did feel like I lost something every time I moved something around chronologically. That felt like a lie. So I tried to keep that intact. Basically, I moved some things around, like the travel vignettes. I put those all together. I sort of put things to do with the passing of the year in one group so that things were anchored a little bit. But yeah, no, there is a document that, yes, would absolutely make God weep, and that I probably will look at from time to time in the future, because you feel like you lose something when you impose a stricter form on something that began that way.
Well, I mean, the main character in the book achieves fame through a kind of viral idea that, can a dog have twins? I mean, I may not have quoted it exactly.
Everyone gets it wrong. It's really funny. They're like, are dogs twins? What can a dog? Yeah, it's can a dog be twins? So it makes even less sense, and it's better that way.
And so that brings her to a level of fame almost equivalent to Marion Graves's in her time, or Hadley Baxter in her time. I mean, so you're writing about the broken consciousness of a famous woman, a woman famous in the portal and in real life, and these are historic. The Maggie's novel is about two famous women too. So another.
Well, she's a novelty. I would say that that's true, that she's a little bit brought to the public's attention as a novelty. So in my book, the thing that's not true about my protagonist is she's not a writer, because it would have been a tremendous out if I had gotten to fill that book with what I was reading, with beautiful quotes that other people had written. Like, that's what you stuff that sort of like lyric formal book with. And I didn't want to give that to myself. So no, she's a pure novelty act. She comes on stage and she is wearing a little tutu, and she like dances for her single set, which is just like, can a dog be twins?
Well, one of the things that you say, I mean, about one person who she meets and is talking to is this man she meets in Toronto. She said, the Toronto man that she talked to so often in the portal, that his voice, his actual mouth, which produced, quote, the modern tone incarnate. And so I felt like that was partly what you were trying to do in the structure of the novel. And I wonder, Nathan and Maggie, if you could speak about not the modern tone incarnate, but how, if at all, did you try to, you don't really create a voice from the past, like an archaic voice, but how did you try to work yourself back through the writing into a tone that suited the post-Civil War South, and for you, Maggie, much of the first half of the 20th century. I mean, until Marion, is in 1950, and then the 2014 part. How did you work between tones? I guess is my question. Nathan.
I mean, it was really hard. I thought it was really hard. It took a long time. People point to dialogue a lot in terms of I don't know, sounding sort of older or archaic in a sense. But for me, it really is just about the prose itself, and just I don't know, striking a balance, that chord of sort of like, I don't know. I like prose that has an elegance to it, and I think that lends itself to sounding older in a way. But I don't know. Also grounding it in the present, so readers don't feel like I don't know, you're getting one over on them in a way. It has to still be authentic. So I don't know. It was hard. It was a day-to-day struggle, but I just did my best with it.
And how long did you work on the novel? I mean, from the first glimmers that you had of what you wanted to do?
It was about 2.5 years, and then I edited it with my editor for another like 3 months. So yeah.
And Maggie, I mean, you on the one hand, you had to recreate Marion's time and so many places that she is. I mean, there's so much sense of landscape of so many different places that she is in her life, and then also this woman of the first half of the 20th century who is distant in time from us. I mean, was there an effort to try to create a tone, a voice, not for her but through her, that reflected that time rather than a 2021 kind of writing? Was that
I didn't really want any sort of historical affect to it. I thought a little bit about like Wolf Hall and Hilary Mantel and how those are very modern novels, but set, in the much further past. I did have sort of a intensity or earnestness to the tone with Marion, I think. And in some ways, because I knew that would be the bulk of the book, and fairly early on, I realized it was going to be quite a long book, also sort of a neutrality. So I wanted something that was short of omniscience, but had more flexibility than a really close third. And then I started writing Hadley's sections later. I can't plan my books, so I just started writing, thinking I'd write about this aviatrix. And then maybe a month or so in, I kind of out of nowhere wrote a section in Hadley's voice that had nothing to do with my pilot or anything, but I just felt that it was the missing piece, and sort of a more acidic voice and kind of an accent, and also gave me just the relief of being able to write closer to the present and not being sort of have this counter current of research in my face all the time. And that was sort of the tonal difference was for me sort of, relief, and kept it interesting as I was working, which was, it took me 3.5 years to write the first draft, which was almost 1,000 pages. And then another year of editing. And then when I sold it to my publisher, it was 2 years and 8 months before it was published. So the whole process was about 6 years.
Was that because there was a lot of editing? I mean, once it was sold, were you not?
Yeah, we did do. I mean, it was too long. It would be about 25% longer. I cut every draft, and there was sort of some structural stuff that needed to be moved around, which with a book that long just has a huge ripple effect. You change one thing early on and you have to correct it through 800 pages of manuscript. So it was really a daunting process and required a lot of stamina, but some things were relatively unchanged, like really Marion's arc didn't require a lot of editing, but Hadley was something I reworked and reworked and reworked.
I love reading, I've been reading a lot of 19th century novels during the pandemic, and I love reading the introductions and the notes on the text, and like the Oxford World Classics and the Penguin Classics, because they often will explain how, I've been reading a lot of Trollope.
I've been reading a lot of Trollope. I read Trollope during the pandemic. I was just going to say, Bill, were you reading Trollope? Because I could feel it, because I also had that feeling reading the introductions, but you go.
Well, yes. We have to talk about Trollope. I've been reading a lot. I've read 7 Trollope novels in the last 18 months. So, but what I love is, so they'll say, well, he forgot that in this book, the series I read were the Palliser novels, so they're the same characters largely through all of these 6 novels, and he'll forget that they had 4 children in this book, and now they only have 3, or he spells one name this way and then he starts spelling it another. Just everything that you were saying, Maggie. That I guess Trollope was not as careful as you have been.
Well, and he probably had to handwrite, which I can't.
That's the thing, yeah. And we can do like the Control F in our documents. It's like, and just like find out how many kids we gave to this guy. Trollope couldn't do that. And he was a much worse writer than all of us here, so that was a huge issue for him as well.
Maggie, you referred to the cross currents of research, like what you're writing, and then the sort of the research that you did. If you could talk about research, how it helps fuel things, and also that word you use, the cross current, I think is what you said. It's almost as if it's like a drag too. So if you could talk about how research helps and hinders, and then Nathan, if you could speak to that too, about just getting back into the 19th century, getting back to the period of the 20th century that Marion lived through.
Yeah, huge drag in every sense of the word. Yeah, I think I said countercurrent. I sometimes it's like swimming upstream, you know, I just want to move forward with the story, but I can't because I have to find out how an ocean liner is launched or how an ocean liner sinks or what kind of airplane would be used in this context and if all these things would be possible. Like, it was important to me that this flight around the world be feasible. And in 1950, it would have been borderline feasible. So I had to spend time, you know, making sure I could sort of fit the book into the reality of the world, which mattered to me. And because I didn't have a plan for the plot, I just had to sort of proceed and then look up what I needed to know as I realized I needed to know it, which sometimes meant, you know, ordering out of print books and then digging up my little fact and putting it in and finally getting to proceed past that point. And so, I mean, that was also very fruitful because I would come across details that I otherwise wouldn't have, and that would sort of redirect the story. Like the character in the book that's sitting in the water grizzly was a real person. And I came across him just reading about historic Montana. And there are these accounts in sort of explorers' diaries. And I thought, that's interesting, in it goes. And put him in early in the book and then used him again much later in a way I hadn't anticipated. And there are lots of little things like that, like learning about wartime artists, which the main character's brother becomes, and that sort of thing. And then kind of ongoing reading about airplanes and pilots. So it just felt like this something I just couldn't, there was no end to it. It was just this constant, you know, every time I needed to know something, I'd be like, well, when would that house have had running water? And I once talked to someone who wrote both fiction and nonfiction, and I'll be interested if Nathan agrees with this, but she said, you know, if you're writing nonfiction, people think you need to know more details, but really you can say the army camped by the river. But if you're writing fiction, you have to know what they ate and where they went to the bathroom and what they slept in and how, you know, what it smelled like and looked like. So I've always thought that was pretty apt.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I just want to say about writing nonfiction, since I wrote a nonfiction book, you know, a lot of times I would be writing something not speculative, but, you know, trying to analyze things that, you know, that being protagonists, the people in the book, Virginia Woolf and some other writers did. And I would constantly think, well, I know it's not false, like what I'm saying, but is it true, you know, about what they did? And that was, I mean, it was certainly based in fact, like, oh, this is what is in her diary, or this is in a letter, or we know they did this. And then yet somehow to explain it made you worry that what you were saying was false, even though it was evidently true. So, so Nathan, I mean, if you could talk about your research and whether it was also, you know, a help and a hindrance and, you know, something worrisome, I mean, to get caught up in.
Yeah, I mean, there was a part of me during the entire writing process that cowered in fear of the Civil War reenactors who would mail me letters about everything I got wrong, you know, in the book. And there were, you know, long days learning about peanut farming and just, you know, getting someone from point A to point B, carriages and horses. I rode a horse once when I was 5, never again. So just, I mean, I can't wait to write contemporary fiction so there can just be a car, you know, or a plane. So yeah, but then you just reach that point in the process where you exit research mode and it's just about the story and you have to put the story first. I believe in primacy of the story above the research on some level, but you have to also get it right and, you know, do justification of the past and try to be as accurate as possible, I think. So it's just that balance that you have to strike. And I feel like readers know when you strike it, you know, they know when it's right. And you do too. So, yeah.
Did you get letters from war reenactors?
I'm still waiting. I'm still cowering in fear. No, I mean, I want to get at least one, but no, I haven't heard from one yet.
I was worried about aviation nuts. Yeah. I think we've been saved a little bit by not doing in-person events because there's no one who like comes to the event for the explicit purpose of being like, on page 349, you know.
That is, so an advantage of the pandemic is that you haven't been called to account for perhaps minor errors in your books by lunatics at live.
Exactly. It's all worth it.
There's still time.
I got a corrective letter one time about like I had made a passenger pigeon joke and it was like the wrong kind of pigeon I had cited, and it just became this huge thing where I was like, this guy is reading Pre-Study, it was that book, and he's like, the only thing he's carrying away is my like, you know, imprecision on the subject of pigeons, my vast ignorance, you know, the air is like full of the beating wings of what I don't know about pigeons to this guy. And I like think about him all the time, just out there with like the knowledge that I didn't have.
You know, and I'm really pedantic about other people's books too, so I think it's totally fair. And I tried really hard.
Yeah.
I'm you know, you're only human.
It's true. It's true. The pigeon thing's gonna get in.
Well, Maggie, maybe you could write the letter in the voice of the Civil War reenactor and send it to Nathan. So you
please don't. Please save me from that.
Well, I think another thing with research is that there's always this temptation to be like, well, I went to the trouble of learning this, so I'm gonna put it in, you know. And I think that was some of my trimming that happened. I'd be like, well, I did all this research on plate tectonics and the prehistory of Antarctica, and my editor was like, you know, page 700, nobody wants to read a history of Antarctica, so maybe we should cut that. She was right.
Nathan, you said that you want to write a novel set in the present day just so that there could be a car. Is that something you're working on now? I mean,
I stupidly am writing another historical fiction. I don't know. Something's wrong with me. I need to see a therapist or something. I mean, I don't know. I think part of me loves the constraint of writing in the past and the challenge of it. And I don't know. I just like to get up in the morning and I don't know, attack that challenge and go at it. But one of these days I will do a contemporary novel, and I am looking forward to it.
It's funny. I have actually like a bunch of aborted novels that all had historical elements, and I could never get them off the ground because my nature is too paranoid, too cautious. It could never get to the point where I just flew free of the facts. So I think that you're right that it's probably like an attraction to constraint, but then there's also like a bravery to historical writers that they can actually get off the ground with these things. And I was always too afraid. But even my novel set in the present, like I kind of didn't put any cars in it because that would almost necessitate research for me. Like, how do you open a car door? Like, where's the brake? So there are those of us who like need to do research just to like be in our own lives at this moment in time.
So presumably you either have a self-driving car or are not driving.
I have a chauffeur. That I'm married, named Jason Kendall, and that is what I did to solve that problem in my life.
So Nathan, what is the novel set? What period is the novel set in, or can you say that? I mean, just like, what constraint have you set for yourself in this book?
Pretty much the same period, but I, like Maggie in her novel, I have a boat in this one, and it's in a different country at points. So I pretty much just ratcheted it up and the stress levels for myself and made it worse. But I'm not going to say any more. I'm still, you know, it's formless. You can't speak on it, you know. But yeah, it's rough, but fun. It's, you know, I do it for a reason. I love it.
It's also so fun.
It's so fun. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's like we're in hell. We're torturing ourselves. We wake up every morning and we just like, you know, go into the chokey and like bang against the walls. And at the same time, it's super fun for us, and we wouldn't want to be doing anything else with our lives. Like, what is that?
I like what Nathan you said about in writing the historical novel, you know, there's some constraints, like you've set constraints on it. Is that a good, like in any kind of conception of a novel? I mean, is setting a constraint on it liberating? I mean, paradoxically liberating to be able to do something if you set these constraints so that you know more carefully what you're doing? I mean, is a constraint paradoxically liberating for a writer of fiction?
I just don't think I could do it without enjoying that aspect. I think I'd go crazy. I mean, I've flowed everything through that worldview, whether it's my editor saying, we have to cut 10 pages here, or he wants to, and it's like, well, I can't, this is essential to me. But then it's like, okay, well, why don't we think about it? Maybe you can find 5 and you can figure out a way to make it work at some other point. And it's like, okay, it becomes a challenge in a way. And the whole thing's a challenge. Again, it's like the research, but I'm not that good at like grammar, honestly. And there's people who read the book and they only want us to talk about the grammar. It's been through multiple editors and all that sort of stuff, or whether it's the first draft, it's just me. And it's like, well, I'm not going to get everything right, and it's just across the board. That it's just going to be challenging. There's gonna be people who are critical of different parts of it, but I just embrace it all and I just try to push forward. And I think it all is a constraint in a way.
Maggie, Patricia?
Yeah, I think so. With Great Circle, my previous 2 novels had both started as short stories, and so going into them, I also didn't really have a plan, but I at least I'd committed to a verb tense. I had some structural sense of what it was. And this was the first one I just started from nothing. And randomly, like, verb tense was this bugaboo for a while. I'd be like in bed in the middle of the day being like, oh my God, like, should it be present? Should this be present tense? Should it be past tense? And it was just like, I needed those basic technical decisions that just like actually affect everything and are so inherent to the book. They're difficult to make in a vacuum.
Right.
And everything about this book was sort of in a vacuum, which was why it like sprawled and sprawled and sprawled. And yeah, I always think too, like, I don't really teach, but when I have, it's always, I think when you give students writing exercises, you always want to give sort of as many constraints as possible, because the constraints are kind of actually like the skeleton. It's like what you build the thing on.
Yeah. I'm coming from a place where I started out writing poetry, and like we're addicted. We're these little freaks for constraint. And also, no one is talking about this, I'm writing about a place that's built on constraint, the character limit. So that's what I like. But I mean, I think it's also really like babies want to be swaddled up. Like we feel safer. And then when you feel safer as a writer, you feel then paradoxically more free. Like you can do what needs to be done. So something has to like bind up your wiggling little limbs and all of those things that can make you feel unsafe if they're not, contained in some place, and then you can do what needs to be done here.
Well, so we'll go to questions soon, but before we do, speaking of constraints and what you were saying about character limit, it was making me realize that Trollope and Dickens, one of the brilliant things one of the things they are both so brilliant at is the tailoring it to the serial form and the serial length, and how magically, I mean, although it's obviously not magic, they are able to write to that exact same length each time with so much depth and so much incident and so much psychological truth, and yet they know that they only have those 25, how many ever words it is. I mean, I when I was reading during the pandemic, I read also Martin Chuzzlewit, which and I realized in my Penguin edition that each of the serial, monthly serial parts were 40 pages. So I was able to guess exactly how many pages were in the book, as I knew each time I knew I would have 40 pages left. And so the way that it was all so constrained that way was part of his genius. I mean,
but it's also like whatever it is, whatever the constraint of the length is, your body gets an instinct for it after you've done it once or twice. Like all of us knew probably when we hit 40 minutes on this talk, right? Or when we hit 45 minutes, like we felt something in the upper right-hand part of our heads that said, it's like time to start the questions now. And you do. So you're watching like a body in action. You're watching like a body's instincts in action, which is always really interesting to see.
So tell me what Trollope you have been reading.
So I started with The Warden because obviously I'm adapting Pre-Study with Heidi Schreck for Amazon. And I sort of had the idea that it could be like a Village Green show, or the show where, you know, like the clerics are all squabbling, like on the Village Green or in the church over these like meaningless titles, over these meaningless episodes. And I was like, well, Trollope is the person to read for that. I mean, can you make a modern show about like the Catholic priesthood that is like Trollope? So I started with the Warden, and I was going on to Dr. Thorne and Barchester Towers and all that. And it was incredible. You have he's so funny. He's incredibly funny. And it didn't seem like when people talked about Trollope that was the thing that they talked about.
I just ordered earlier this week The Warden and Barchester Towers. And before I came on here, I got an email from Three Lives, the bookstore that I shop at, which is 2 blocks away from our apartment, that Barchester Towers is in. And that the Warden is about to arrive. So, I won't read them out of order.
Right. No, you definitely shouldn't. But it's amazing, because you think, I wrote in my notebook when I was reading them, that you think that Trollope is writing novels about clothes, but actually he's writing novels about bodies. And there are these moments, oh my God, you're going to go so freaking crazy during Barchester Towers, during the scene, that I won't give it away for you, but it's like suddenly people aren't wearing clothes and someone is kneeling, say at her father's feet, and he is reaching down to her. And they are immensely moving in those moments, among the comedy and among the picturesque. But yeah, you have a major treat in store.
Nathan, you were talking about you had horseback, there's horses and horseback riding in your novel, and you'd only ridden a horse once, when you were 5. But Trollope was a regular fox hunter and rode a lot. And in every novel, no matter how hard he has to work to squeeze in a chapter about fox hunting, he does. So yeah. So that brings.
So try that.
Yeah,
just give it a shot, man.
Make it your thing.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So yes, instead of having.
We lost him.
So
yeah, the key is always more horses, I think.
I think so too.
If I've taken anything from this event, it's
a horse driving a car.
Yeah.
Try it. Maybe give it a shot.
That's like, can a dog be twins?
That's right. Oh, you got it that time. Nice one. Really good.
So the first question from the audience. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Nathan. We will now go to some questions from the audience. There's a question. Nathan, can you speak to the experience of having your first novel receive this kind of recognition? How do you approach your sophomore project? And then Nathan, after you answer that, Patricia, you might as well answer that too, since you published this is your first novel also.
It's very strange. You write, all of us know you write a book and you're kind of just in your own world. I always, in my head, I think about like one planet like blinking in a universe, and then the book is published and there's just like all these other readers, they're like blinking planets, and the universe is full of these people reading your book, and it's all kind of crazy. And I think every writer has it on some level. Mine was a bit crazier, I suppose. But in terms of approaching my sophomore project, I just, I think of it just as writing anything else. I just keep my head down. Speaking of horses, keep the blinders on from, all the noise. I write in the morning. So the morning's just kind of like my time. And I don't check my email. I try not to. I don't do any of that sort of stuff. I just focus on the new work, and hopefully eventually it gets done, and that's all I can hope for. So.
Yeah, there actually is. I think it was easier for me because I had written previous books, and something like Pre-Study is like the length of a novel. So it was like I sort of done it. I didn't always tell the truth in that book. So I'm like, I can do it again. But there is a Booker curse for the first novel if you win it. So if you win the Booker with like a debut novel, I was actually told this by a radio interviewer. She's like, you won't win, but it's good. It's great because there is a curse on, debut novelists if they win. I was like, well, bullet dodge. So I was really excited because
Someone tell Douglas Stewart, poor guy.
I know, he's fine. He's, sitting down with Camilla for a chat and he's doing okay. But yeah, you can't, I think that part of the reason, like the fame that the Booker brings, and even the readership can be talked about as a burden, is because it is suddenly like all the previously closed eyes of the world are like unshuttered now upon you. And that can feel like you are writing and reading and doing everything against like this glare of lights, and that everything you do is being watched. And you just have to forget that. Like Nathan says, you have to have your time that is protected time, and you have to be like a little bit of a psycho about it. You know, you have to purposely make yourself forget that there are like other people in the world.
Maggie, the second question you should answer first, since you we were not able to ask you. Great circle. The second question: each of you see writing as your lifelong vocation? Maggie.
Yes, I mean, sort of, because by now I'm deep in it. I've had a pretty charmed trajectory, which I think is true for all three of us. But yeah, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop right after college. I wrote the first draft of my first novel the next year. Then I had a fellowship at Stanford. Then my first novel was published when I was 28. My second novel was published when I was 30. So this is basically the only thing I've done. It's been my full-time job. Although there was the 7-year period between my second book and Great Circle, during which time I branched out and I write a lot for travel magazines now, which was sort of interwoven with the process of writing the book. But yeah, I mean, it's what I do. It's how I make money. It's how I spend my time. I have no other skills, no interest in going back to school. So here we are. And it is, I think Nathan and Tricia both alluded to this, but, there's this element of freshness and surprise in it. If you want there to be, you can write books about different things and go down different rabbit holes, try new things. I do feel like I'm always sort of learning and expanding, or I hope to. So yeah, it's rewarding, and it is, my job.
And one of your skills presumably is driving, so you can be Patricia's chauffeur.
That's a low blow. I feel like, it's becoming about now how I can't drive.
I know how to open the car door.
I have a driver's license, but I grew up in Brooklyn, so
you don't need that.
Learned how to drive very late, so I'm not very good at it and don't do it. So anyway. About vocation, Nathan, Patricia, can you talk about vocation?
Yeah, I was raised by a Catholic priest, so whatever I do, I'm going to be like, yes, God put it on me. He put it on my heart to do this task in the world. I'm always going to be a freak about it. But yeah, it was just since I was really little, I had this idea, and I also do it, I think, in a sort of religious or at least ecstatic way. Like the states that I work myself into, or the states that I exist in when I'm writing, are not normal human states. So it better be a vocation, or else, it is something else, and then we would have to talk about that.
I agree with Patricia wholeheartedly. I don't know. I've been writing, fiction since high school, and it was a very private act. I remember this strange period, like late in high school, where I came across this inspirational Will Smith video on YouTube, and I was making all of my friends watch it. I don't know what it was, but it goes on about plan A is plan B. I'd go through a wall for what I do. And there was this moment where everything had been so private for me. I was like, you guys, like, this is how I feel about writing, and I was just, inspiring to make this happen. So yeah, I think it was always there. And I hope to do it for the rest of my life. And whenever I'm questioning myself, I'll just go watch the Will Smith video.
Yeah, send me that link. I want the link to that. Drop it in the chat.
The third question is so far there's a statement as I'm reading it. You are all so young. I think it is refreshing reading books that are more free from constraints. Do you think that comes from your young age?
We should maybe establish how old this person thinks we all are. I was like,
maybe Tricia and I just look young.
I think we might look young, yeah. No, at this point, I'm like 39. So that's not, I feel young, but I don't know that is actually even true about me anymore. I think that they like to talk about you for as long as they can as a young writer, because then it seems like you're exciting. But after a while, you have to admit that you've been around the block a time or two. So
I was hoping that they were including the moderator in that.
You're very young, Bill.
But Maggie, Nathan, I mean, how I won't ask how old you really are. I mean,
I'm 38. I think I've sort of writing with fewer constraints now than when I first started or when I wrote my first book. But I think that comes from practice and sort of technical confidence and just having a better understanding of how a novel works, because it's really hard to practice writing a novel. Like writing a novel takes a long time. And it's kind of only when you get to the end of it. Like when I was in workshops in writing school, I would write short stories partly because I could then look at the whole thing. Whereas to look at the whole thing of a novel, that's a big investment of time. So I think, yeah, I feel less constrained now than when I was younger.
But I think it's also true that like most constraints are private. You won't recognize them as a reader reading a book. There are obvious things like you can write your whole book without using the letter E, but most things are deeply felt and deeply imposed in that way on the work, and you won't necessarily be aware of them as you're reading.
That's true.
Nathan,
Could I go?
I feel terrible. You are young. I think we know that. So I don't know if you have an answer to that question.
No. I hope to reach Maggie's place in terms of how she thinks about it. I feel very vulnerable as a writer. I'm not ashamed to say that, and in a way, it's something I like to pass on to my characters, or hope to. I think, I don't know, all humans are. I certainly, when I'm writing, I'm worrying about how readers will take it. I worry about, all sorts of stuff. If it lives up to my standard, it's hard, but it makes the work better, I think, by just constantly, again, going back to that balance of having your own idea of what the work should be and working towards that, but also, I don't know, keeping the audience in mind to some degree, and being open to your vulnerabilities and accessing that for your book as well. So, yeah.
The last question, and then we will say goodbye, is for the historical books that this reader asked. I heard Maggie say a quote spark for her book was seeing the statue of the woman pilot in New Zealand. I was wondering what sparked Nathan's story. Was there a character that started the story for you, Nathan?
Oh, that's a great question. Nothing like that. I tend to think of my stories when I'm coming up with ideas kind of like in images. And I just had that initial image of George, the landowner, meeting Prentice and Landry, the two freed slaves, and this moment of them in the woods, in this strange intimacy between them, all of them staring at one another. Just the sort of the threat of each other's presence in terms of where they were all coming from, just all this tension of the scene. And I just remember it was almost like a painting in my head, seeing them all there, and I was like, okay, what is this and what comes next? And I just kind of started generating from there. So for this one, I started from the beginning in terms of the idea, what came from it.
I love that image of the painting. It was like a painting in your head.
Yeah, it gives it a sense of grandeur that I don't want to assign to it, but I don't know. It's the best way I can describe it.
It could be on a little, 2x4 little, it doesn't have to be like a massive painting in a museum.
Yeah, there we go. That works. That works better.
Well, thank you all, Patricia, Nathan, Maggie. I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for being here, Charleston, with me. But maybe next year we might be able to convene in person somewhere. So thank you so much for doing this. Have a good.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Glad to
Bill.
meet you guys.
Good luck in
Good to meet
Seattle.
you.
Now that you've moved there.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck, Nathan.
Bye. Thank you all.
Good luck, Patricia.